Okay, everybody, welcome to yet another episode of the podcast, or I should say Vectra AI Prodcast. And I'm the only product person in the room. Look at this group. We have a panel today. These fresh faces are off the heels. The four of us are off the heels of the Gartner Security and Risk Management Conference in Washington, D.C. And heck, we learned a lot, we heard a lot, we saw a lot. We have different perspectives, what we saw there. So we thought we'd have a candid conversation about what we did hear, see. I'll let you guys go around the horn and introduce yourselves to everybody tuning in. Tommy, you go first.
I'm Tommy Jenkins. I'm CMO of Vectra AI.
And I'm Rob Rosiello. I'm responsible for the Americas organization here at Vectra.
Jim Gianelos, RD for Northeast and Canada.
Awesome. So you got different perspectives here. Just so everyone knows, there's almost like a divide and conquer. And what we did was, Tommy and I attended the sessions, right? So we were listening to what Gartner analysts were saying. We were listening to what vendors were saying, and then Jim and Rob did the hard part, or the actually, probably the more valuable part, and that is talking to actual security people on the show floor, amongst the conference, et cetera, and kind of getting their take. So this is kind of a little bit of maybe a little point counterpoint, maybe a little bit of hey, here's what Tommy and I heard. Hey, what did you guys hear? Talking to security practitioners, leaders, what have you. That sound good? You guys ready for this?
Absolutely.
So I think, from the first, I thought, at a high level, I thought the conference was great. I thought it was, I don't know how many of these I've gone to since at Vectra. I think this is our fifth, Tommy. Maybe you've gone to a few more than me, but I thought this one was encouraging from a Vectra perspective, because I started to hear for, I wouldn't say the first time in a long time, but at least I started to hear some validation of the approach that we've been talking about and taking, and what we're hearing from our customers. And now to hear it get echoed at scale from the likes of Gartner is encouraging, right? So from the get-go, first keynote, Gartner, I think it was Chris Michner and I think it was Dennis Yu maybe, talked about this notion of augmented cybersecurity, and that there's this need for a shift in a mindset. Now, Rob and Jim, I don't know if you heard anything about that, talking to security people, if it was echoed when you were talking to them. Tommy, I know you were in that session as well. I've got some takeaways, but at a high level, just those words alone, augmented cybersecurity, what does that mean? What shift in mindset is Gartner talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the biggest, like you said, the exciting thing to hear is kind of this recognition of, look, I have so much admiration for people who are cybersecurity professionals, because I like to think that my job is one of the hardest and worst jobs in the world. But I think cybersecurity professionals probably have the actual hardest job in the world. And the whole augmented cybersecurity is a recognition of that. That's what I took away from it, that it's like, look, this is hard enough, and the world is conspiring to make it harder. And so to your point, it's a really promising thing to hear. From our perspective, we tend to focus in on the SOC, Security Operations Center. Those tend to be the people that we're most trying to help out. And I could just look at the SOC through this lens of augmented and think, finally, people are starting to get how hard this is and getting the changes that are going to need to happen to make their lives easier.
Yeah. Rob, Jim, anything to add to that?
I mean, I didn't hear many of our customers and prospects coming up and talking about augmented cybersecurity, right, using that phraseology, right? But what we certainly talk about and hear quite frequently from our from the communities that we speak with is, how do you equip the threat hunters, the threat investigation, the SOC teams with the right information at the right time to make the right decisions, right? The speed of the attackers is not slowing down. The sophistication of the attackers is not slowing down. So how do we alleviate all of the noise that the SOC has to deal with, all of the mundane stuff, so that you're actually equipping knowledge workers to do meaningful work. So I don't know that augmented cybersecurity is what we heard on the floor, but I think that theme is absolutely ringing true.
Yeah, yeah. I think.
Yeah, I would just add to.
Go
I
ahead,
think
Jim.
it's they don't, the customers, prospects don't use augmented per se, but I think it comes through in just tools, rationalization, optimization of the environment with the ultimate goal to reduce risk. And how we would fit into that is by cementing in some of those tools that they already have.
Yeah,
Is kind of how we approach it.
Yeah, I think here's what I heard, right? And this was what was encouraging, and actually this was said, and it was also recently Gartner issued a blog post on this, but the mindset shift is from a prevention first mindset to a prevention plus response and recovery mindset. So putting response and recovery on equal plane as prevention, right? And that came through right out of the gate. And that's how they would define, hey, augmented cybersecurity is, hey, we got to augment our approach and our mindset to how we approach, how we think about this thing, what we invest in, what we prioritize, that sort of stuff. Comments on that or thoughts on that?
Well, what I loved about this angle was, I think it was right in the opening keynote session that Gartner did. There was this acknowledgement that the traditional mindset tends to be of like, failure is if anybody gets in, and like that is it's such a counterproductive way to look at success and failure in cybersecurity, because it's impossible to like completely keep people out. So I loved elevate the importance of like the full equation, that like response and recovery is just as important as the prevention piece of things. And they were even kind of suggesting like start, like, don't just start that. I think if I remember correctly, they're using the analogy of like, how in a manufacturing plant, there'll be a sign on the wall that says days since last accident or something like that. They're like, hey, instead of like days since last attack or breach, like start looking at things like how quickly did you remediate and solve the situation when it happened. That just to me feels like a better mindset and way to look at things. So that was really exciting for me to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I took away, because I was able to attend some of the sessions as well, is there's the acknowledgement almost in point one here, and point two, that the silos that exist within, large organizations are a point of vulnerability, right? So you've got to look holistically across the organization, across the process stack. Woj, you and I talked a lot about that, shifting from a tools to a process, or shifting from how do the tools enable and equip the process across the organization. The other part that I took out of some of the sessions I went to is, how do you put the right tools in the right people's hands to do the right job, right? So where should you be doing your investigation and your hunting? Where should you be doing that kind of stuff? Requires a bit of a rethink also. And I think this is where this notion of attack operations comes in, because it's not just defensive. How do you actually turn it a little bit into an offensive security kind of play as well, because you freed up people to do things? And that's where certainly AI was all over the conference as well.
Yeah. The AI was talked about it. I think it was probably talked about in more sessions than almost anything else. And not only from AI as an attack surface, Gen AI as an attack surface. Gartner, a lot of sessions like talked about that from both the Gartner side and the vendor side. But then the attacker's use of Gen AI and the need for the defenders to embrace AI as a mechanism. And it kind of talks to the third point here. And Jim, you and I have talked quite a bit about Copilot and the use of Copilot in the organization. Would love your thoughts on that. But there was one session, and I don't, the session title escapes me, but they talked about, the analyst had asked the audience, how much time is your team spending just maintaining tools? right? Versus actually doing defense, right? Are you spending more time maintaining tools and technology than actually doing defense? And there's that, the part of the mind shift is we've got a, security operations center is not, hey, operationalize these tools so that we can be compliant, so that we can prevent attacks from happening. It's this notion of, yes, hygiene's important, posture's important, prevention's important, but it's never going to be enough. You have to invest in the ability to respond and recover from attacks. Hence, how we're thinking about, Tommy, you and I talked about this, I think at the end of one of the days, probably at the bar, attack operations. Maybe it was a FaceTime call or something. I don't remember.
I'll just jump very quickly, because one of the conversations I had with a senior exec, talked at our engagement zone, talked about the notion of, hey, my team's really good at detections. Like, we're really good at it, is the way that she phrased it, but we're not great. And we're never going to be great, no matter how many humans I throw at this, no matter what. Just the speed and sophistication, again, makes that detection piece really, really hard. But the promise of AI, and she was particularly intrigued in how we apply AI and ML to things. She was like, you guys give us the ability to be great, right? And I think, again, it's that shift of how do you use AI and ML to equip your SOC and your teams to actually move at the speed, velocity, scale, and sophistication of these, organized crime, rings that are out there in today, right?
Yeah. Jim's quiet. He's on mute. He's pondering. He's like, what's this profound thought that I can have around this?
Well, like I said, we talked a lot about Copilot being a new threat landscape, and the complexity of how do you provide security around questions that someone could ask once they've compromised an identity.
Yeah.
So, and then that's why the identity piece and the understanding of response and recovery is that much more important, because you need that speed to reduce the latency.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new talk track that people are, the security people I was talking to were thinking like, hey, that is definitely true, and I'm not sure yet, because this is all really new for me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like like a shift in mindset it's easy to say, it's much harder to do. So it's
Right.
like, okay, where do you even start? And Tommy, you and I talked about this, and I think Rob, Jim, and you and I talked about this separately, was like, what were some of the macro things we're hearing, or like seeing and hearing across the course of the show and the conversations with customers? And we kind of honed in on three. Like, people talk about tool consolidation all the time, but there's this shift from, I think there were several sessions where it was like, hey, this technology category, ITDR, for example, is not a product, it's a process. Focus on process efficiency. In order to do that, you need to do, there needs to be some element of consolidation. Like, look at these three, like prevention, detection, response are becoming more intertwined. I would argue even the lines are blurring so much that there's probably market confusion there as well. And then third, hey, identity. We know ITDR there were several sessions on ITDR, a lot of sessions focused on identity. But in terms of how an attacker uses from identity hygiene all the way through to detection and response, I think that the opportunity for that is, I think there's some confusion there as well, and an opportunity for clarity. Comments from any of you guys in terms of that, and the questions you heard from customers or prospects, or even Tommy, if you heard similar things in the sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I totally heard all this stuff. And it's interesting as I reflect on, between sitting in Gartner sessions, between talking to customers that walked up to our booth, between walking the show floor and seeing a bunch of vendors, the overarching thing I noticed is this real tension between what Gartner is saying and what there's a tension between what Gartner's saying on one side, what vendors are saying on the other side, and what customers want, who are kind of like hanging out in the middle trying to figure it out. Because, Gartner is absolutely saying all these things that you've got on the screen, and I believe them all to be 100% true also. Vendors still are coming in and they're saying a slightly different version of this thing, though. Like, they're coming in and going like, hey, we can solve all your problems, or hey, like, we can solve this one problem and we can solve it perfectly and no one else can solve it. And so and customers are like standing in the middle looking at both sides of this, trying to figure out how they're gonna navigate. So it gave me some more sympathy for security professionals, because they know that they're faced with really hard choices when it comes to this stuff. It's like what Rob was saying earlier. They know they can't completely solve it themselves. They also know there probably are some vendors out there who can solve pieces of things really well. They don't believe, and they're probably the right to believe, that nobody can solve all their problems. And so, Jim, just as I heard you talking about Copilot, it made me think about this, because, certain vendors who sell solutions like that, they'll position like, hey, we can solve the Copilot issue for you, or any LLM issue that you might run into. But they're looking at it from one perspective that's probably not covering everything. So yeah, it's all real, but it makes me not envy security buyers. They're in a tough spot trying to navigate this. I know, Jim, what'd you hear at the booth?
Well, I was going to say, so part of the consolidation challenge they face is also legacy business processes, which is budget. So they have hard lines for network, OT, cloud, identity, and that's almost as causing some of the prevention of the consolidation, because they can't figure out how to financially pay for stuff. So they kind of have to take things incrementally. So we'll talk to people about how to do things over a long period.
Yeah.
To sort of, when we're positioning Vectra, we're positioning it as future proofing as well. And I think, and then there's also a little bit of technology debt with full capture, packet coverage, things like that people, kind of human nature, they don't want to let go of what they've had, because what if it doesn't really work? Or I'm used to going back to try to search through everything.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of kind of legacy things that I think why change and breaking habits are hard.
Yeah, and I think we have to be empathetic to, like, to what you said, Jim, about there's existing processes, there's existing tools in place, there's existing workflow. There's like embarking on a complete shift in mindset is a giant, potentially a giant change management project that does not take 6 months, a year. It takes a long time, right? And there was some good advice from Gartner on the fact that, hey, where do you want to be as a SOC? Like, what is your vision as a SOC, and how are you going to get there? Where are you over-indexed, right, in your workflow, in your processes? Where are you over-indexed in tools? Is that where you start consolidation? Do you have redundant tools in order to fill gaps? Are there areas where you can look at that? Identity is a big gap. I think not a lot of people have identity. ITDR, it's relatively new in place. It's relatively undefined. It's relatively unknown. So is that the place to start? Who knows? But we internalize these things as these a big macro level stuff, because at the end of the day, what was encouraging for me was around the value outcomes of this kind of augmented cybersecurity mindset that Gartner was talking about. And when I started listening to it and connecting the dots, I'm like, oh, it's like this. It's very similar to the value outcomes that we've been talking to our customers about, right? Our platform is based on coverage, clarity, control, but what's the value outcome of coverage, clarity, control? Reducing exposure, removing latency in processes to gain efficiency. And then the bottom one, maximizing talent value, maximizing the value of the talent you have in-house to do what they're super good at, investigating and stopping attacks. right? Not maintaining tools, not triaging thousands of alerts, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know, guys, if you have kind of thoughts on this or validation of this thinking from conversations or challenges to this thinking from conversations.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, I think clearly, I try to open every conversation with a client with tell me the top 3 or 5 things that are top of mind for you, right? Not technologies, not whatnot, and it was people, it was tools, it was risk, right? And back in the days, it used to be vulnerability and threats, and now I think everybody just acknowledges that they're drowning in vulnerabilities and threats, so they're really pivoting towards risk towards the business. The people, again, I ask the question, is it attracting, is it retaining people? What is it that you're dealing with? And most will say both. Listen, very few environments today are homogeneous. And even if they are, they're not going to be because of merger, acquisition, divestment. So even if you go to a single set of tooling, it's not long before you're having multiple tooling again, right? So the fact that we're able to talk about playing in their ecosystem, irrespective of what their EDR technology is, the fact that we can integrate in an OT kind of environment, which it doesn't have EDR on it, the fact that we are agnostic to who their SIM and their SOAR are, and yet what we're doing is stitching all of that information together, taking it from their various data sources, doing the threat hunt, doing the threat investigation at speed, at scale, where it should be, and then presenting the information into their SIMs and their SOARs. To me, I think was a very powerful conversation that we were able to have with customers and prospects, because while they're dealing with tools consolidation, I think what trumps that more often than not is value realization and optimization of the tools and the processes. And this year, as compared to last year and even prior years, I found that I had more process related discussions and about how we could help people address the real world of what they're dealing with real world attacks. Right. So
hey, a big part of my conversations too, kind of dovetailing what Rob was talking about, was human targets, usually have MFA, can be bypassed. The non-human ones are really hard to cover and protect. Those are the high value targets. Cloud, you have all these different types of cloud roles and identities. And then with the network, that's just the traditional attack surface or attack area that the attackers go through. But the identity piece seemed separate from what the security people were really doing. And there's, again, that was part of what they're trying to figure out. Because when I would ask them about identity, some folks were saying, well, that's like that group across the hall, right? But so they're still kind of working through how they put it all together in one thing.
That probably happens with every new attack surface, because I got the same sense with Gen AI as well, that people are like, well, wait a second, do I have to worry about the Gen AI stuff? Isn't that something else? So you're right, Jim. I think it's to
that point, Tommy, from an earlier podcast that Mark had done, he talks about MITRE coming out with 56 new techniques. So so I tell people, do you know there's 56 new techniques MITRE's identified? No. I said, well, we're building models to help you there, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of to the newness and the speed of to which everything's happening.
Yeah, what I walked away with overall is, and I think, Rob, you were talking about this a little bit, people need a practical approach to how they're going to address this stuff. And they really appreciate a practical type conversation. People don't want to hear oh, I'll solve all your problems, trust me. Like just give me all your money and everything will be better. People they know it's incremental, that they're going to have to get there. They know there's steps that are along the way. So that was my biggest takeaway of if you can, if we can make it easy for security people to look for incremental steps they can take, that's what they really want.
Yeah. And I think, I look at these 3 things and I look at this conversation and even this minimum effective tool set kind of thought process from Gartner, break the cycle of acquiring too much gear. And you guys brought up a good point around attack surfaces. Every time a new attack surface emerges, what do we tell security leaders, buyers, practitioners to do? Go buy another tool for that attack surface. And how do attackers think about attack surfaces? Do they think in individual attack surfaces? They do not. They think one giant attack surface, and any way they can get in and move around, and that calls to minimum effective tool set. It's like, if you think like an attacker, there's one giant attack surface, and you need to protect all possible angles where that attack surface is network, identity, cloud, Gen AI, endpoint, email. Who's going to give you the most effective solution in terms of the way you manage that from a process standpoint, right? And what's needed. So anyway, we can talk about that for hours.
No, I mean, Woj, you and I, this is part of our like fun banter, right? I mean, this is where our attack signal intelligence comes in. This is where behavioral versus anomaly based. This is where, recognizing that most attacks are low and slow, right? And they take their time, and having the tooling and the kind of solutions that are able to address what the reality is, as opposed to there's certainly brute force, but there's the nasty thing called the real world, where attackers are lurking for quite a while trying to find things and find their inroads, and I think you capture it quite beautifully when you talk about all I need is an identity and a network.
Mhm.
Right.
And Copilot, like Jim said.
And now Copilot or OpenAI.
And I move really fast. I don't have to dwell. It won't take me as long to do recon. I got Copilot. I'm an attacker. I got an identity. I'm on the network. Oh, and look at this. It's Microsoft Copilot for M365. I'm going to go and run my recon, right?
Yep.
And do we know when attackers are abusing that tool? We're working on that, right? Anyway, there's a slew of podcasts out there on that. Guys, this was great. We should do more of these. This is good just to kind of riff and kind of share our thoughts. I appreciate all three of you joining today. I hope the audience got some value out of it. We're now on Spotify, everyone, as well as YouTube. You're probably watching this or listening to this on YouTube, but you can catch us on Spotify. It's another great episode. Guys, Rob, Jim, Tommy, thanks for being part of it, tuning in, and your insight. Appreciate it.
For having us, brother.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Woj.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.